So what I'm going to start with is a blank, almost blank HTML page. So I'm going to create a new document in brackets, and I'm going to use, I've got this HTML templates plugin that just allows me to choose an HTML template, and then it gives me the basic structure. So then I'm going to save that into that. I'm just going to find a folder somewhere here. I've got a tutorials folder. There we go. I'm going to call it blocks-tutorial.html. That's just the name I'm going to give it because there's already something in there called blocks. So then you can see once I've saved it as an HTML file, brackets is smart enough to realize that that's like these are elements. This is a color code. So this is your property, or not property. This is your that's CSS. Anyway, so it color codes everything. My content is white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start going through and adding HTML to build that basic page. I'm going to go back and reference this real quick. So here's the page I just saved. So this is what I'm going to reference. So I've got a header, a nav, main content area, and a footer. So I'm gonna start with my header. And there we're just going to put an H1. And brackets is helping me along here because every time I start typing something, it makes suggestions, and I can just accept. So we have a nav. I will just put in a short list in there. Come on. So I'm lazy, so I'm just going to copy this, paste it a few more times, and then end my list. So then I can just call this up and we'll just do like I'm just going to add some more links in here. We're starting to call it Nebraska instead of UNL. Alright, so I've got some links in my nav. And then I have a main element, which is all my main content for the page. So I'm going to give that an H2. Head my main content. I'm going to create some columns. I'm going to do something for columns in here, I think. And we'll do like a div. And a paragraph in there. Let's do paragraph. Alright, so now I've created a basic page with some options to do some columns, and I can play with the menu, and I've got a email link at the bottom. So now, now I need to title this. So I'm going to call it November 29 Workshop, whatever. And I need to add in a link. And we're going to create a new CSS. We'll call it Blocks Tutorial. Give it a type. Tell it it's a style sheet. Alright, so now I've linked to a non-existent CSS document which I need to create. This is hopefully not moving too fast for everybody to follow. Is it good so far? Alright, so this is, I mean, obviously if I were going to build this as a page, I'd want more content, but this is the basic structure of something. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new document, and I'm going to put it in my left column over here. I'm going to save it as, now I got to name it Blocks Tutorial CSS, and I got to put it in the same folder, and I save that. Then I use my care set. Alright, and I'm ready to go on my CSS. Now, when it comes to CSS rules, I generally like to start at the top of the page and work my way down. So that's probably what I'm going to do here. I'm going to start with, actually, I'm going to do what's called a Css Reset. And I'm going to build in I'm just going to do some a global rule that applies to every element to just sort of reset everything to 0. Because by default, most browsers have a built-in style sheet that adds padding and margin and some other measurements to elements on the page to give them some default space. I want to get rid of that because I want to start from scratch completely and build my own. And then this border box, this box sizing, not box shadow. Box sizing border box is useful for when I'm creating columns. So then I start with my big elements. And if we have some time, I could throw a font in here too. But I'll do something like background color. And what I like to do in brackets is just put a color in and then right click on it and go to quick edit. It gives me an option to play with using RGB code or hex code. And then I can customize my color a little bit. Maybe I want to make it a little darker, more blue. Once I've done that, when I close this, now it's changed from that named color to a RGB color. I'm going to make a width 90%, margin, auto. That's going to basically center it and make it flex with the page. Actually, let's skip that and do something with wrapper instead. So I'm using wrapper in this case to just mainly contain my content and keep it away from the edges of my window. So if I'm going to save this, I'm going to save this, and I'm going to go to my browser. The easiest way to preview this is just simply load it up in a browser and see what it looks like. So there we go. So there's my header, nav, main content, paragraphs and columns, and footer. And my background is blue. So and I know something's working. So I'm going to leave this open and just come back to it and reload it whenever I want to see what I've done. So I start with some of the bigger elements. So I'll start with the header. I'm going to make it a width of 100%. I'm going to give it a border. And I'm just going to make them wildly different colors so we can see what's what. And give it some padding. And then align my text in the center, so when I go back here now, there you can see I've got my header is all in red. And I'm going to add a background image to it. We're going to go to the URL, we're going to go to images, we're going to find sunset GIF. That's a little big, so we need to do background size. Make it cover. I probably need to make mine a little bit bigger, so I'm going to mess with padding a little bit. There. So now you can kind of see it. Let's do this. So I'll center. There we go. That's better. So I've centered my GIF background in the element, and I've set it to cover, which is kind of cool. So now I've got this little animated, well, video style. It's not super high quality, but it works pretty well. And it's flexible, because everything is percentage based in this. Alright, so then I would go to the next element down. World. There we go. I figured that way that was spaced over so well. Alright, so then I want to do my nav. Alright, there's nav. You can see what I've done with nav. So what I kind of want to do is customize nav a little bit. We're going to make it like a gray. And then we'll call that good. So now I want to create my menu. So I can, in CSS, I can select objects within or elements within other elements by cascading them in the CSS declaration in the selector. So I want to select just anchors and stuff inside of nav. So I start over here by calling up nav, and then the space UL, calls up the UL inside of nav. We're going to do list style none to get rid of bullets. We're going to do, actually that's all. Actually, we'll do text align center. Kind of winging this. So I'm kind of doing one thing at a time and then reloading to see what happens. So now they're centered. Then I can call up a rule for my list items in NavUL. Make them inline block. That will turn them into a row instead of a column. So now I've got a little bit more of an interesting looking. I still need to make buttons and change the color. I don't know why this keeps getting tabbed over. Nav, UL, LI, anchor. So now I'm just referring to the anchors. And I can, in CSS, I can control 4 states of an anchor. The hover, or the link, which is the normal state. Here, let's just do this. Link visited. Can somebody shut that door? Thank you. Alright, so nav A, link visited, hover, and active. I'll just put spaces. Alright, so now I can control each of these 4 states independently, and those are mainly for detail purposes. So my A colon link would be, we'll make this white or close to white. Make it the RGB code for Alice Blue. Let's do padding. Give it some padding. There. And we kind of messed up something a little bit here, but we'll fix it. And I think that would be at some point it's just a matter of playing with numbers and seeing what looks good and what doesn't. There we go. That's better. So then I can start going back to my anchor and saying, okay, I don't want black. I want something, let's stick with the blues, I guess. Made some, you can play with transparency too with RGB color. Oops. There we go. Maybe I want to make a little more stylistic buttons. I do border radius of like 5 pixels. That rounds the corners a little bit. I can add a border to them, make them just more like buttons. And I haven't set a hover state yet, but I will when I get there. Maybe what I can do, I can adjust things like text decoration will get rid of my underlines. So now they're more like just text buttons. I need more padding. There we go. What else? Box shadow is an interesting one. Let's do 222. Yeah. Go for a little three-dimensional. That's probably too much. This is where RGBA colors with transparency come in handy, because I can make it a transparent white, and it doesn't show up quite as harshly. Let's make it a 0.2. There, then we just have a tiny bit of 3D feel to those. And I could sit here and tweak numbers all afternoon, but I kind of have to, or all morning. Alright, so then what I want to do is adjust my visited. Actually, I can include visited by just adding the comma and adding the selector to that rule. So now I've done link and visited all in the same rule. And actually active, if I want to do that one too. Active state is the state that exists when you're just clicking on it. So all I really want to do then is change the hover state. Actually, let's do this. I'm making it slow transition to my hover state. Well, slow. Rebecca purple. I didn't even know that was a color. Color. We're just going to swap colors. So that's going to be that color. And this is going to be that color. So then when I mouse over them, there I've got you can kind of see that transition doesn't happen instantly. That's what that transition, this right here does. Allows me to set the transition to happen over a quarter of a second rather than instantly. So there I have I know my colors are bad, but I have a menu with some stylized buttons. So then I want to keep going down the page. I've got main next. Just do that, bring it up to the top. Probably not going to do a lot with main, except for I do want to incorporate Flexbox Columns. And if anybody's worked with Flexbox, you understand it's a bit of a tricky thing to wrap your head around. Basically what I have is a container set of rules for the parent and a set of rules for the children, or the items that become the columns. So what I'm going to do is set up rules for main to make things in it columns. And I just kind of go down the list and be like, alright, I want display as flex. So I go display as flex, flex direction in a row. I don't want to reverse or make anything columns. Flex wrap. We'll just make everything wrap in case something doesn't fit. Justify, we're going to leave that one out. And align. We're going to just stretch. So everything's the same height. What that does is you notice before I reload all this, all three of these things are in a column, once I reload, now they're all in columns individually. So I've got 3 columns, and I kind of want to go through those then and say, okay, main H2, I'll look that up. This is why I have these side by side, so I can kind of go back and forth and be like, all right, I need H2 in main is what I'm trying to prevent from being a column. So I'm just going to do that by making it a width of 100%. And just for fun, we'll do center it. And then for the other 2, I have a class name called column half. And all I'm going to do there is width of 50%. We'll do a little padding. Then I have columns, and it would work better if I had more content in each column. Let's do the here. Copy something. There. So now I've got 2 columns worth of content or text. If I wanted to do more columns and I had more divisions over here, I could turn into columns. I would make them maybe 33% width instead of 50%. That would give me 3 columns across, because basically I'm adding the columns up to 100% here. So 50 and 50, 2 columns at 50% add up to 100 total. 3 columns at 33.33% would add up to 100. If I wanted 4 columns, I could make them 25%. I would have to have 4 divisions over here for that to work. I don't. By the way, you can toggle these things up to hide the content, so I'm just looking at 2 divs now and hiding all the content. Alright, so the next thing I want to do is my footer. And I'm going to do, again, border. I'll make it orange so it's visible. So there we go. We'll add some padding to it. We will text align right. And I still have this link that's blue, so I want to do something with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back up above where I set all 4 links, and I'm just going to create an anchor rule. So this is globally going to affect anchors, but it's going to ignore these in particular because they're lower in the CSS and they are more specifically identified in the selector. So we're going to make the color, let's see what's a good, well, we'll just make it a weird color. So now my links are all going to be yellow. These links don't change because they're more specifically, they're more specifically identified here. This is more generic because it's not specifically identifying anchors within anything, it's just anchors in general. I could do this, and this anchor by itself controls all 4 states, so now there's no hover and there's no visited or active state that's different than all 4 states of this particular one are color yellow, which is fine for what I want here. Alright, so the last thing I want to do on this perhaps before I start, actually the last thing I want to do is add some media query to it to make it responsive. Before I do that, does anyone have any questions or anything you wonder about or want to see done or how to do kind of thing?
I'm not sure how to get the header image to work.
The header background image?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, how do you link it? It says like images slash. Like, what is that for? Is that like where it is in your?
Yes. The images refers to, and let me go back to my folder structure here. I have a folder in here called images. So from my CSS document, which is right here, I have to tell it to go into the images folder, which is why that's there, slash, and then look for sunset.gif, or GIF, however you want to pronounce it. So that's what that's telling it. It's saying, okay, from the current location of the CSS document, go to images, and then look for this file name. Does that make sense? If I were in a folder, you know, you can go into multiple folders. You can have a whole string of folders buried, nested inside of each other. You can use the path here can be told to go out of a folder using a dot dot. So dot dot slash tells me go out of a folder and then into a different folder. I don't want to do that. By the way, this is brackets being helpful. Brackets is saying, okay, you've got a whole bunch of stuff here. What are you looking for? So I can go into 6-word. So basically what I've just told it to do right here is go out of the current folder, which is 6-word website, go back into 6-word website, and then into images, and then look for sunset. So I give it a string of commands in this instance of where to go. Obviously this is redundant, so I'm just going to remove it. But that's how that works. It's basically the same as in your HTML. When you put an image in your HTML, that pathway works the exact same way in your source in the HTML as it does here in your CSS. It's just understanding where those folders and files are with relationship to each other. And this is why folder structure for web design is super critical. Because if you don't know where the folder is or where the file is in relationship to another file, good luck connecting those two. Brackets can help because it starts to look at the folder you're in and suggest other things that are in at that level. But if it's not in the same, like if this file were way down somewhere in one of these other folders, there's no way I'd ever find it and be able to link it without some and then I'd have to recreate that whole folder structure once I uploaded it to my web server. So yeah, good question. Any others? All right. So if not, then I'm going to show you some little tricks about responsive design, and I'm just basically going to do it by switching the header background to a different image at a certain size. So responsive design is all about websites responding to their display size. So if you're looking at it on a mobile phone, it'll be different than if you're looking at it on like a screen like this or a laptop, and you can define a lot of different sizes that do different things. So I'm going to do 2 things with this at a certain size. I'm going to change the image background of the header to something static. So right now this is a GIF. I'm going to make it at a smaller size. We're going to change it to just a flat JPEG. And then we're going to change these 2 from columns into simply 2 rows stacked on top of each other, a single column. So we're going to do that using something called a media query. It's called it's actually at media. So it's saying at media of a maximum width, let's do 480 pixels. And I got to double check and make sure that I'm doing this syntax correctly. Yeah, I gotta have it in parentheses. So we gotta put parentheses around the parameter. So this is the parameter for the media query. So it's saying when the media is at a maximum width, which means smaller than 480 pixels, apply this rule. And then what I'll do is I'll say, all right, to header, we're going to set a different, so we're going to go into images again, and this time instead of the GIF, I want to select the JPEG. So now what I've said is a media query to say at this width, 480 pixels or below, the background image is going to be this. Otherwise, it's going to fall back to this. So if I reset, if I save this, I reload this page. Now if I resize this, once I hit 480 pixels, there you see it switch. So at 480 pixels, it's using a different rule for that header. So now I've decided, so the reason I would do this maybe is if I've got a video in the background, that takes a lot of bandwidth to download. I want to be conscious of my mobile users, and if they're on a cell phone, I want to be nice to them and say, all right, I'm just going to give you a flat image to download because it's smaller, it'll download faster, you don't use as much of your data if you're paying for data. Some people still don't have unlimited data. So that's one thing I can do is I can use that media query to switch my background image. And then what I'll do is use the same media query to switch sizes of, or switch the, because at some point this becomes really hard to read. I cannot read 2 columns of text at this size. It's just, that's a bad idea. So what I want to do is somewhere around the same size, maybe even slightly bigger, so maybe 640 pixels. I want to switch it from 2 columns to 1 column. So I'll set up another media query. Add media max width of 640 pixels. This is more for example than anything else. Main. Actually, let's do it this way. We're just going to switch width. So dot column half becomes width of 100% instead of 50%, right? So if I save that, I reload, and I hope, yeah. So here we go. So somewhere in here, this is, okay, so this is my 640 pixel threshold. It switches from 2 columns to 1 column. It might work better if I actually put in, let's just do this. Let's put borders on these so we can see them. Alright, so there we go. Here we go. Now you can actually see the columns and what they're doing. So there's my 2 left and right columns at 400 or 680 or 640 pixels. They switch to 100% width instead of 50%, which means they're going to stack. And then again at 480, our header background switches to the static image. So that is a basic use of the media query to make stuff responsive. And we're just about right on time. Are there any other questions regarding HTML or CSS? Or if we have a couple minutes, does anybody want to see the, walk through the process of uploading this? Does that interest anybody? If that's not a question for anyone, we can move on past that and call it good. Yeah. So unless there are any other questions, I'm pretty much done with this. This is our basic page, responsive now because we've added those media queries in. Plus everything being % based, that's also a version of responsiveness too. So everything flexes with the size. So if there aren't any questions, thanks for coming. If anybody wants to come up and ask some questions of me personally, here I'll be hanging. I'll be here for a while yet.